Jess from Suchable Knit here, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about combination knitting, stitch mount, and why I purl the way I do, and why I am sometimes knitting through the back loop. You'll notice that a typical stitch mount has the leg on the front of the needle is closest to the tip of the needle, and the leg of the stitch on the back of the needle is farther away from the tip of the needle. That is a typical stitch mount. A reverse stitch mount looks like this, where the leg of the stitch that's on the back of the needle is the one that's closest to the tip of the needle, and the leg of the stitch on the front of the needle is farther away from the tip of the needle. That's considered a reverse stitch mount. When you're working a stitch that has a reverse stitch mount, you always, well, when you're working any stitch, I should say, you always work the leg of the stitch that is closest to the tip of the needle. So for a reverse stitch mount, that's in the back. So I'm going to work it like this. This one's in the front, so even though it's a purl, I'm going to work it like that. Now you'll notice that I purl a little differently than most people. A typical purl should go, and I have a hard time doing it, should go this way when you wrap around the needle. I do this way. You can see it requires a lot less movement, so it's easier on the hands, it's faster, and it has a more similar tension to my knit stitches. Sometimes people struggle with their purl gauge, and purling this way helps to fix that problem. I'm coming to the end of a row here, so I'm going to turn, and we'll talk about it some more on the other side. So obviously I'm doing 1 by 1 ribbing here. And the issue with that way that I purl is that it creates a reverse stitch mount. So because this is a knit stitch on this side, it was a purl on the other side, and so it created the reverse stitch mount. So I have to compensate for that by working it in the back loop instead of in the front loop. This is called combination knitting, where my knit stitches are not reverse mounted and my purl stitches are reverse mounted. It's combination knitting. And I learned about this because I apparently learned to purl quote unquote wrong. I eventually learned it's not wrong, it's just different, and you have to compensate for it on the next row. If you don't compensate for it, that's when you end up with a twisted stitch. So it's reverse mounted, but it's not twisted yet. If I work it this way, it becomes twisted. And that's twisted because I worked the leg of the stitch that is farthest away from the tip of the needle. So if I work here, that reverse mounted stitch does not twist. If I work it this way, then it becomes a twisted stitch. Now, when you're reading instructions in a pattern, they always assume that you have typically mounted stitches, not reverse mounted stitches. And why that's important makes a big difference for things like your increases and decreases. Things like knit two together versus an SSK. Let's make this a stockinette swatch. Okay, let's talk decreases on combination knitting. So I am knitting, I've changed to a few rows of stockinette here. I am knitting flat, it makes a difference. We'll talk about knitting in the round in a minute. And you can see that because my last row was a purl row, all of my knit stitches are reverse mounted. Now, if I were to knit two together like this, it would be twisted and not very neat looking. So, because we've got reverse stitch mounts, in order to knit two together, we have to actually fix their mounting, put them back to a typical mount. Now when we knit two together, it's much, much neater. That second stitch doesn't show up on the front side the way it did a minute ago when I did it twisted. So when you're working your pattern and it says knit two together, you have to think slip, slip, knit two together. But when you're coming to a SSK, a slip, slip, knit, you don't have to actually slip them because they are already in the reverse stitch mount. That's the purpose of the SSK, is to slip, slip, to reverse their stitch mount and then knit them together. But you've already got them on the reverse stitch mount, so all you have to do is knit two together in the back loop, and that gives you a beautiful SSK. So you always have to think about, in those decreases, which way are my stitches facing and which way do I want them to be facing. So an SSK is always a left-leaning decrease. So you want the stitches to be leaning to the left. Of the two stitches we just put together, the one on the right is covering up the one on the left. So it's a left-leaning decrease. A knit two together, I'm going to change that stitch mount, is a right-leaning decrease. And so we've now got the stitch that was on the left is covering up that stitch that was on the right, and it's a right-leaning decrease. If you are just happily knitting through the back loop and you come to a knit two together in your pattern and you simply knit two together through the back loop, you have made your decrease going the wrong direction, because you've essentially made an SSK, not a knit two together. So as you're reading your pattern, you always need to understand, what are they wanting you to do? Are they wanting your decrease to lean one direction or the other? Make sure your result comes out that way. Another thing that we sometimes come to a pattern is they will tell you to knit through the back loop, because for whatever reason they may want a twisted stitch. But if you have a reverse stitch mount and it's telling you to knit through the back loop and you do that, you have not twisted the stitch the way they want you to. You have to actually do the opposite of what they're asking in order to twist that stitch. So you also have to read your pattern and interpret, what is it the designer's wanting you to do. Are they, why are they wanting you to knit through the back loop? Are they wanting you to do it because they know you have a reverse stitch mount for some reason, or because they want you to twist the stitch? And so you need to know how to handle the stitch in order to get the effect that your pattern is asking for. Let's take a look at combination knitting in the round. So I have another swatch here. This one's in the round. When I knit in the round, I like to use magic loop, so that's what I've got this on here. Now, when we were knitting ribbing flat, you noticed it was the knit stitches that were reverse mounted because they were purled on the other side. On this, because we're knitting in the round, the knit stitches were knit on the last row, so they are properly mounted. But the purl stitches, you can see, are reverse mounted. And people go, oh my God, no, I don't want to purl through the back loop. But when you've reverse mounted it, it's easy to work into that back loop. The time that it's difficult to work into the back loop of a purl stitch is when it's properly mounted like this, because then you have to go and twist it, and most of the time we don't want it twisted. But if your pattern calls for purling through the back loop, then you can interpret that they want you to twist that stitch. And so depending on if you're knitting flat or knitting in the round, you'll know if you need to change your stitch mount in order to get the effect that they are actually wanting. I hope all that makes sense. Combination knitting can increase your speed. It can improve your attention, but you have to know how to handle those stitches on the next round. Understanding stitch mount is also really important for even if you're not combination knitting. There's a lot of times that we end up with reverse stitch mounts by accident. Maybe you've pulled your needles out and you have to rescue all those stitches and get them back on your needles. And sometimes when you're rescuing them, they might end up reverse mounted. And so you need to know how to recognize that and how to handle those stitches. And if you can handle them without manually fixing them every time, it will really speed things up. I hope that is helpful and has answered some questions. And when you see me working in other videos and other patterns, and you're wondering why my purl is funny and why I am working in the back loop, now you know.